Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slightly Scientific Podcast. Probably the only podcast hosted by three 14-year-olds, and in this episode, it will be me, Finley, and Oscar. And this is episode 6, which is absolutely insane. Time has flown by since I first started the podcast, which I think was in August 2020. So we've had this podcast for several months, more than several months. 8 months? I probably got the maths wrong. I've got no idea, but a long time. And today, I think you guys are going to enjoy this episode because we are going to be interviewing an Emmy-nominated documentary producer and filmer, Sophie Wright. And let me just say, straight off the bat, her stories, the adventures she's been on are amazing. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode because it's really interesting to see all the behind the scenes of how these documentaries are made, the time it takes for people like her to make them, and overall I think it's a really interesting job to have and to discuss. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy.
How do you plan a documentary?
That is a very good question. It is a very short question that has a very long answer. Planning a documentary takes a long time and a lot of people. So I guess it probably helps to talk about sort of making a documentary in total. Just making a documentary that's half an hour or an hour long can take 6 months to a year. So, and that's just making it. And it takes a huge team of people that do all sorts of different jobs. It's definitely not just a director or a producer. You have crew that do camera and sound. You have researchers. You have people who look for archive and footage. You have all the legal team. You have production managers that support all the logistics of getting you out on shoot. If you're traveling abroad, you have fixers that help you with the language and booking things. It really is a huge team effort, and I think that's the thing I always like to remind people, because it's very easy to see one or two names at the end of a film, but actually it's a huge team of people that make it all happen. In terms of coming up with the ideas for documentaries, they can kind of come from anywhere. You can, for science documentaries, quite often we're looking through the news and for new studies, new results, exciting new projects. Quite a lot of the time you're trying to stay ahead of the news because you want to be able to show the film, when the announcement is made about a big new discovery, but that usually means you have to have been starting to make the film about a year beforehand, which means you probably have to have been planning the film at least a year and a half or 2 years beforehand. So yeah, it's we're very lucky, but it's a hard job. You have to try and really stay connected with the scientific community and make sure you're using your journalistic nose and finding out about what's going on and earning that trust to kind of find out what scientists are working on really before they're ready to announce it to the public. And then you can be kind of making your exciting film or your news documentary or whatever it is, so that it can kind of all get released at the same time. But in terms of the time it takes, it really depends on the project. Some things can be in development for 3 or 4 or 5 years. If it just takes that long to get the trust of contributors or to get the story right or to convince a channel or a broadcaster that they should pay to have the film made. But if it's a really urgent story or something that happens in the news, you can get it developed and commissioned in a few days and, even made and finished 2, 3, 4 weeks later if it's a really fast turnaround kind of current affairs story. Usually no one gets any sleep and you have a team that's about 4 times the usual size if you're trying to do that, but it is doable. So that answers your question.
Oh yeah, that's crazy that it can take from anywhere from just a few weeks to years and years.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to think about, I guess, is it's not an easy job if you're, we call them channel commissioners. So they're the people that work for the BBC or Channel 4 or news networks or Netflix or wherever it is, and it's their job essentially to choose what they want to show on their channels, and they have a certain amount of money, then they can only make so many films, and they kind of have to allocate the budgets to different filmmakers at different companies, and really plan out, you know, not just what's going on your television screens or your streaming services that week, but next month, then in 6 months time. And, you know, again, for some projects it will be planning for 2 or 3 years time. So if there's a big anniversary of something or a major event, you know, you'll have teams planning those several years in advance. So I don't envy them their job. I think it is slightly miraculous. They have so much to juggle, and obviously we're on the other side. We're always desperately trying to convince them to give us their money to make the films that we want to make.
So it's like a massive commitment when you choose to make these documentaries.
It is quite a big commitment. It takes a long time. It's certainly less fast turnaround than, say, if you were a journalist, you maybe a written journalist. You know, it takes a lot longer to make a film than it maybe does to write an article, which isn't just, you know, there are some articles that do take years of research and writing, but you don't have the option usually to turn it around so quickly. Or if you know, news journalists as well are used to turning things around in a few days or a few weeks. So it is a slower process. It's a more painstaking process. But that is part of the joy of the job, is you get to take time to really work with the subject matter, really plan, really execute the film the way you want to. You get to spend time obviously planning it and filming it, but you spend a huge amount of time in the edit. So most films, you'd spend a minimum of 2 months just editing all the footage and making all those little decisions about music and the voiceover. And it's a real joy to get to spend that much time making something and telling that story, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
How would you film at sea?
So I recently worked on a documentary where I was filming on a ship for a couple of months, and it was with the Royal Navy. So it was actually a warship, which was a very exciting experience. Filming at sea, I guess there are a few crucial differences to filming on land, the main one being that the ground is always moving. And one of the important things when you're trying to film is trying to stand still. So that was probably, I'd say, the biggest challenge, was trying to staying upright. We got quite used to it. Was more holding the camera steady. And I'm sure you guys will be familiar with spirit levels, but we have these little spirit levels on our cameras or our tripods that help us, you know, figure out when the shot is level. But of course that goes out the window when the ship is pitching every minute of every day. So I'd say that was probably the hardest thing. Seasickness fortunately only hit us for the first few days, but I can tell you that as well, trying to film while you're seasick is a bit rough. And the other thing you really have to bear in mind when you're going away to sea to film is that you don't have backups. You know, you can't order in a new lens if it breaks, or you know, you can't get a replacement for something, you can't swap someone out if they're ill. So you really have to be super prepared and make sure you have everything you need with you, that you know, if something breaks, you just got to fix it in situ. There's not really any other choice. So yeah, it's kind of those sort of things you have to bear in mind. And then of course in an environment like that, you know, anything can happen at any time. So some documentaries we make will be very scripted and planned, and we'll have a plan for the day and know what we're shooting at what time. But when you're making an observational documentary, you're really just following things as they happen. So there were definitely a few nights we got shaken awake at 2 a.m. because something was going on, and you have to just roll out of bed, pick your camera up and start filming, really.
Actually, so how long are you actually at sea when you do sea filming?
Oh gosh, it just depends on the film, really. So the project I did last year, I was away for a couple of months. But it really just depends on the documentary. There's some projects people go away for, you know, 7-8 months at a time. So yeah, you choose to commit when you sign up, really.
How do you come up with ideas for each documentary?
That is a very good question. I guess it's much like any creative industry. Brainstorming new ideas is a sort of constant demand of the job. We do it. I'm a film director and producer, and I also film. So sometimes I'll do that and I'll come up with ideas and pitch them. But most companies also have dedicated development teams who they never actually make the films. Their sole job is to come up with ideas, write them up, make glossy little taster tapes and pitch them to channels to try and get them funded. And then as soon as they're funded, great, green tick, they hand them off to the film team, people like me, to make them, and then they start on the next idea. So it's a really specialist skill. It's almost a different mindset you have to have. When you're developing ideas, you need to be as creative and ambitious as possible. And then as soon as you flip into production and you're actually making the film, then you have to be as practical and as pragmatic as possible. So sometimes it helps to have two different sets of people doing those two things, because sometimes if you ask a filmmaker to plan a documentary, they start scaling it back to try and make it more achievable, whereas actually it's a really good thing, I think, to have people who will never have to deal with the problems of actually making it happen, but their job is just to dream really, really big, and that's how you come up with really exciting new ideas and really cool projects.
Why did you choose to study biology?
So I didn't really even have to think about it. I chose to study biology because I was obsessed with animals since I was really tiny, and plants and how they work and why they are the way they are. I really enjoyed biology at school. I enjoyed all the sciences, but I think I definitely, the bug for, excuse my pun, the bug for biology definitely got me. So yeah, it was really a no-brainer when it came to studying GCSEs and A-levels and choosing university. There was nothing I really wanted to do more. I always loved art and creativity, and I'd say I enjoyed those subjects on par, but my view was that I would have closed off options of having a scientific career if I hadn't done a degree in it. So to me, it was really always important to get that training and those qualifications to be able to sort of pursue anything I wanted, because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do when I was at school, but it felt like a good decision to kind of follow what I was really passionate about.
What sort of specific topics did you look at?
When I was at school or when I was at university?
What university?
So I studied biological sciences, which tried to give us a really good grounding in kind of most of the main pillars of biology. And in first year, what you almost always find is that you don't get much choice. You have to study a range of basic topics. So that was everything from evolution to cellular biology, cells and genes, biochemistry, animal behavior, all the different, really just learning all the different major groups of animals and plants and bacteria and all the different taxonomies and that kind of thing. And then as you go through the subsequent years in your studies, in your degree, you get to choose and tailor a little bit more the topics you want to study. So I always liked what my professors liked to call charismatic megafauna, which are the big, exciting, fluffy animals that everyone loves, like pandas and dolphins. And they always got very sad that people weren't ever quite as excited about the little bugs or the bacteria. Although I did love them too. I have a very soft spot in my heart for insects. So I studied evolution, ecology, animal behavior, a lot of evolutionary biology, which is looking at how we have ended up the way we are, not just us, but all the different organisms that exist on Earth, how the processes work to slowly adapt and change, how the different kind of evolutionary conflicts arise and resolve themselves. And it feeds into so much stuff, not just your anatomy and history and paleontology, but things like tackling diseases and epidemiology as well. It all comes back to evolutionary biology. Anything to do with raising offspring and social evolution, it all comes back to that. It's really, really exciting.
How did you go from studying biology to producing documentaries?
So when I was at university, up until I was at university, I think I always assumed I wanted to be a research scientist. And going through university, at the end of your last year, you do a mini research project, which is kind of a taster of what life will be like if you choose to go into scientific research. And I just found that the switch from learning, essentially researching a new topic each week and writing an essay on it and having a discussion about it, that I'd done in the first 2 years of my degree, I absolutely loved. And then when it came time to really focusing down for a long period of time on just one topic and doing really painstaking research and essentially focusing very, very hard on a very tiny question rather than focusing in quite a shallow way on lots of different questions, I found the focus just wasn't something that suited me so well, and working alone didn't suit me so well. And I realized that I much preferred the perhaps slightly lazy approach of leaving it to other people to do the painstaking research and make the discoveries and publish the papers and spend decades of their life answering tiny but very important questions about how the world works. And I really enjoyed getting to sit down and read the article they wrote at the end of those 10 years and absorb all their hard work and then move on to the next topic. So it was quite clear to me that probably staying in research wasn't necessarily the best fit for me. And actually journalism was something that always appealed, and I think maintained a lot of the aspects of university that I really enjoyed. Learning new things every week, getting to really quickly get across topics and absorb them and regurgitate them in a way that made sense, and spreading essentially awareness of things that I found interesting and thought were important. And then with filmmaking, it was this really lovely additional aspect of all that creativity and the photography and storytelling and getting to use music and color. And it's a really happy medium for me between my scientific interests and my creative interests. So I think it's one of the really important things to remember about science is there's so many different careers you can have in the field. You can 100% be a research scientist, and there are so many different fields you can go into, but you also have science policymakers and science journalists and teachers, and it's one of the really important things to remember is we all kind of rely on each other. I couldn't do my job without the research scientists out there working really hard to discover new things, but similarly they'd find it hard to do their job without science policymakers, and none of us would know anything at all without our amazing science teachers at school. So it really is a kind of big collaborative effort in the pursuit of something that I think we hopefully all agree is important and worth pursuing.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask the filming technique, because you also film a lot of these documentaries.
I do, indeed.
Where, how did you learn, because obviously you studied biology at university, but where did you learn the filming part of that?
So I learned to film on the job, which is not necessarily uncommon. I think the lovely thing about making documentaries is people come at it from all different angles. So some people have studied journalism, some people have studied filmmaking or camera work, some people come at it through a specialist topic, so science or history or current affairs or whatever it happens to be. And there's kind of space for everyone, and everyone brings different skills and experiences. And then there's room when you start working to learn some of the things that you maybe haven't had as much grounding in yet. So I was really lucky. I got to work when I was a researcher and an assistant producer. I got to work with directors that did their own filming, and we had a second camera. They taught me how to use it. It was my job to get the less important shots, and it was something I really loved doing, and it's something that tapped into a lot of the photography that I did in my spare time and enjoyed. So just from there, really chose jobs that would give me the opportunity to keep filming. And you learn as you do it, and you make mistakes on the go, and you try and look at the people above you who are teaching you and learn from their mistakes before you make them yourself. But I think it's really important sometimes to be brave and to have a go at things and to trust yourself and to not be afraid to kind of take that first step. I was a little bit afraid at the start that I'd start filming and it would be awful and I'd never work again. But I think having a little bit of faith in yourself and starting off small and just building, and like with everything in life, practice is really, really key. You just have to put time and effort into honing your skills and learning. And I'm still learning new things all the time, and people who are 10, 20 years more experience than me are still learning new things. So it never ends really, but that's kind of the joy of it.
How do you make a really engaging documentary?
That is an excellent question, Finley. I think all of us are constantly trying to pursue the answer to that question. I can't necessarily say I've ever made a perfect one, but I think particularly for the kind of films I make, there are two main things that we try and do. And I think the first is showing people things that are surprising, that they don't expect, maybe allowing them to have experiences they haven't had before. One of the really privileged things we get to do is to go to spaces and meet people that people sitting at home wouldn't have the opportunity to. And by filming it and telling those stories, we allow people at home to have those experiences sort of through their screen. So I think certainly the films that I love watching are ones where I get to go to a place that I've never been to and feel like I'm there and learn new things and see brand new things I've never seen before. But I think the other really important thing when you're making any kind of film, whether it's a documentary or feature film, is in the storytelling. And it's really important to tell stories in a way that people can connect with, and to identify not just the facts, because anyone can read an article or a scientific paper or a Wikipedia page, but actually finding the sort of nugget of the story and what the challenges, who is your heart with in the film? What are they trying to achieve? What are the obstacles in their way? And do they manage to do it? And that can be a person, it can be a scientist, it can be a doctor, it could be a tree, it can be a space, a little space rover. It doesn't have to be a person. But I think it's always really important to understand who is at the heart of your film. And that's where the secret to really good storytelling comes. I'm still working on perfecting it. I have to say that. I'm by no means achieving it 100% all the time, but it's what we all aim for.
What was the favourite documentary you worked on?
Oh gosh, that is a really hard question to answer. I have had a huge amount of fun doing my job, and I have very fond memories with almost all of the films that I've made. I'm going to cheat and choose a few. I think there's different categories. I have some films I've made where I've got to go to very exciting places. Going to sea was very, very cool. One of the first jobs I did at the BBC, I got to go into some underground Egyptian tombs full of cat mummies, which was astonishing. I've been very lucky to go to the redwood forests in California. I've been all over the world. I'm just doing a project now where we're going inside caves. You get to do some really exciting things. And I think, particularly in the science films that I make, another huge privilege is you get to learn about really cutting edge science. And, again, I've been hugely lucky. I got to film inside the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, which was extraordinary. And I've gotten to visit some mountaintop telescopes all across America, and I've been able to get inside hospitals to film. I filmed the first, it's called a DCD heart transplant. It's a sort of new method of doing a heart transplant, and I filmed the first one that was ever done for broadcast in the world. And that's the kind of thing that, you have to train as a surgeon for almost a decade to be allowed in that room to do it. And so to be allowed in there is a huge, huge, huge privilege. So I think that's the other really exciting part, is getting to learn about stuff that happens before it even hits the news. But I think beyond all that, probably my favorite films I've made are the really sensitive stories that I've covered. And a couple of years ago, I got to spend a year filming in maternity hospitals and watching babies being born. And I think actually of all the incredible things that I've done, getting to build those relationships with those parents and being allowed in that private space when they're having this incredibly private experience of having a baby. Sometimes it was their first baby, sometimes the babies were really poorly, being trusted and allowed into that space and forming those bonds, and now seeing those little babies starting to grow up was probably the most special experience I've had so far in my career.
What was and is your inspiration?
Oh gosh, that is a very good question. In terms of the films that I make, I think a lot of creative people would agree that sort of inspiration kind of comes from all around you. I really like watching drama films. I really love looking at photographers and photojournalism and art, just learning things about framing and light and color, and you know, reading stories and reading articles. You learn so much about verbal storytelling, and really you learn and are inspired by people all around you. In terms of the topics and the subjects of documentaries, for me, I really like to make films that have a positive social impact. So I try and follow the work of a lot of activists and scientists that are kind of pushing to improve some of the difficult things about the world and how we treat it. And I think it's always important to sort of dig down and find the issues that are really important to you, because every single one of us can make a really, really big difference with what we do. So if you find that thing that you really value and think is really important, and you try and make sure that whatever you're doing in some small way at least is furthering that goal, then you know, you can end up making a really, really big difference to the world.
That is amazing, because I really enjoy doing filming, and I really like science. So I think being
very cool. You sound spot on perfect. What kind of filming do you do?
I do, because I quite like doing visual effects. So not but
Okay.
That's just kind of like what I do. I don't really do anything with science with filming, but yeah.
But then I hadn't done anything of the two together until after I left university, and I never thought they could be linked. So I think sometimes it's important to just follow the things that you enjoy, and sometimes they can combine in weird ways that you didn't expect later on. But you know, if I hadn't indulged in doing all the photography that I loved when I was a teenager, then I wouldn't have been able to become a camera woman in the way that I have now. And similarly, if I hadn't done a degree in biology, then I wouldn't have been able to start off as a researcher helping, you know, the teams that made science documentaries. So every little strand of your experience and your skills and your passions and excitement kind of contributes to opening opportunities up for you later on in your life.
I think that's so cool. Yeah. And I just loved the fact you were able to go to all these different places. CERN, which I've always wanted to go to. I find that really cool. As well as about the first DCD heart transplant. I think that's some really cool places, especially to be able to film and see the first one of that, broadcast that.
Definitely, but it wasn't the first one ever to be done.
Broadcast, I meant, yeah.
And doctors have been doing it for a while, and you know, credit to them because it's just extraordinary. But there is something really. It's hard to find words to describe it, but essentially the process involves the heart is removed from the donor and essentially hooked up to a blood supply in a mechanical box. And we were driving down the motorway with this heart in a box, and there was a clear plastic window in the lid, and you just looked at it and it's doo-doof, 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 beating. And you know, then you get to the second hospital and you watch it being placed into and connected up into someone's chest, and it really brings home just the extraordinary skill that that all these people have that we don't get to see as members of the public every day, whether it's a doctor or a scientist. And you know, one of the great joys, again, of being a journalist or a filmmaker is that you don't just get to experience it, but you get to share your experience with other people. So it's very special getting to see this stuff, but it's also a really lovely feeling knowing you've captured it in your footage, and in 6 months to a year, you're going to let other people experience that too.
Yeah, it must be. That must be amazing. Yeah, I think we're running out of time now, which is a shame. But thank you so much for answering all of our questions.
You're so welcome. Was there anything else you wanted to ask before I went away?
No, I think you answered all of the questions really well. I'm so happy we you allowed us to interview you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for asking me, and I really enjoy your podcast. So good for you. It's very admirable to have, a lot of the questions you were asking me, you guys have dreamed this up out of thin air and made it happen, and you're doing a lot of the same processes that we do for our job. So good for you guys.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, take care. Have a lovely Saturday. It was, and I look forward to hearing the finished episode.
Yeah, it should be really good. Thank you so much. Have a nice weekend, you too.
No worries. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you. So thank you so much to Sophie Wright for explaining to us everything about the behind the scenes, to what it takes to be filming overseas. When you have like no backups, you need to make sure you bring everything that you really need. And thank you so much to you guys for listening. And we hope you really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. See you next month for our next podcast. Have a good day.